Welcome to our October the 1st Heritage Kitchener meeting. So, first of all, on our agenda, well, I should interrupt before I go to the agenda because I'm sure all of you have noticed that we have a new sound system and video system, and I hope we can just bear with what we have to deal with as far as the sound buttons and the video buttons. And Clark has warned me that we can only have 4 mics on at a time. Other than that, we can't hear one another. So I know most of you, you don't put on your mic if you're not speaking. And in spite of the new system, I will continue to look for your hands up when you want to speak. Thank you. So first of all, number 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. So are there any pecuniary interests that members would like to declare? Seeing none, we will then continue on with our discussion items. The first one is 4.1, Draft Heritage Impact Assessment, 169-183 Victoria Street South and 59 Park Street. Diksha Chowdhury, our Heritage Planner, will provide a brief presentation and overview on the item. And Diksha, are you prepared to present?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So this is Jessica Vieira's file. She's not with us here today, so I will be presenting on her behalf. I'll try to answer any questions to the best of my abilities, but if there's something that needs follow-up, she would be happy to do it with you. So the first item on the agenda is a draft heritage impact assessment for the subject properties municipally addressed as 169 to 183 Victoria Street South, 59 Park Street. These properties are located on the east side of Victoria Street South between Park Street and Henry Street. The 169 to 183 Victoria Street South have no heritage status, but they are surrounded by heritage resources. The Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District is immediately to its rear, and with 52 Henry Street designated under Part 5. 163 to 165 Victoria Street South is listed to its right. 189 to 192 Victoria Street South, 55 Henry Street is also listed and is located to its left. And there is the Warehouse District Cultural Heritage Landscape across the street. 59 Park Street is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and comes within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District. The draft HIA has been submitted in support of a zoning bylaw amendment application to facilitate the construction of a new 8-story building on the subject properties. The proposed development proposes to conserve 59 Park Street in situ with no alterations, and it will continue to be utilized for rental housing. There is a later rear garage addition, which is proposed to be removed. The HIA has concluded that there will be minor shadow impacts in the early morning hours on the neighboring properties. Potential visual/architectural and urban impacts include minor impacts to existing viewscapes of the street and surrounding areas due to the proposed development, its architecture, materiality, and height. There's also high potential of land disturbances and vibration impact that have been identified for the adjacent built heritage resources located at 48 Henry Street, 52 Henry Street, and 59 Park Street, as well as 163 and 165 and 189 and 193 Victoria Street South. The HIA recommends a number of mitigation measures to reduce the identified impacts. These include the incorporation of building stepbacks using appropriate materials that are sympathetic to the adjacent HCD and incorporating landscape buffers, These architectural mitigation measures are intended to create a transition from the high-rises proposed along Victoria Street to the low-rise HCD immediately behind the proposed development. Certain protective measures have also been recommended, which include a protection plan for the adjacent buildings and vibration monitoring plans to ensure that the adjacent heritage properties are not damaged. The HIA is also recommending the salvage and reuse of materials where it is feasible from the 5 buildings on Victoria Street that are proposed to be demolished to facilitate this development. At this time, staff are looking for input from the committee regarding the draft HIA. The applicant's heritage consultant is here to make a brief presentation and to answer any questions the committee might have. No motion or recommendation to council is required for this item. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. And committee members, if you'll hold your questions for staff until we've had the presentation from the delegation. So I would invite Nathaniel Addison to come forward and make a presentation, your PowerPoint.
Hello, my name is Nathaniel Addison. I am an architect with the Heritage Consulting team at McCallum Sather. Thank you, Diksha, for the presentation. I think there's minimal overlap between the content I have to present, and I will just read from my sheets for the purpose of zipping through this, since I only have 5 minutes. We were retained by Legion Heights Victoria Incorporated to prepare a heritage impact assessment addressing the proposed development. This bird's eye view delineates the area to be developed on Victoria Street between Park Street and Henry Street. The proposal includes the demolition of 5 detached buildings along the Victoria Street mixed-use corridor and the retention of one 1920s-era detached house on Park Street. This house is listed Part 5 as contributing to the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District. This map, taken from the City of Kitchener's secondary plan, illustrates the relationship of the site, annotated with the dashed red line, with respect to the mixed-use transit corridor and the low-rise conservation district to the south. Not shown is further mixed use across Victoria Street and the Warehouse District Cultural Heritage Landscape a couple blocks north. The Warehouse District is also known as the Innovation District. Here are some photos of the existing resources on the site. The bottom left image includes the listed property at 59 Park Street. The proposed site plan includes the demolition of 5 existing structures to construct an 8-story residential tower with 120 residential units, 2 underground parking levels, and an amenity terrace at the penthouse level. The design includes landscaping on all sides and introduces a laneway condition in the rear. 59 Park Street is proposed to be retained in situ. The later addition garage will be removed, reinstating the original historic footprint of the house and increasing the setback distance between the heritage resource and the proposed residential tower. This chart lists potential impacts of the development and addresses suitable mitigation measures. I will quickly highlight the primary measures we have recommended. Number 1, to provide a transitional scale development along the transit corridor to create a buffer between the residential HCD and the dense vertical intensification to the north and east. Number 2, provide public realm improvements such as lighting and landscaping. Number 3, provide a visual barrier where the rear laneway interfaces with the Heritage Conservation District. Number 4, the use of compatible materials. Number 5, to use detailing and vertical horizontal articulations to break down the massing of the tower. Number 6, to provide a step back on the rear elevation, creating a podium to face the Heritage Conservation District. Number 7, to reduce surface parking on the site. Number 8, the retention of the Part 5 designated building at 59 Park Street. So here is the proposed development. We can see the podium has been created through differentiation of materials on all sides, as well as a 1.5 meter step back on the facade facing the Heritage Conservation District. Vertical elements break up the horizontal massing to reduce the impact of the pedestrian experience off of Victoria. There is improved public realm by means of landscaping on all sides and lighting features. The above-ground parking, the existing above-ground parking has been moved underground to make more room for landscaping features that can be a buffer, a visual buffer from the Heritage Conservation District. And the setbacks on all sides align with the existing fabric along Park Street, Henry Street, and Victoria Street. With the west side of Victoria Street preparing for dense vertical intensification with approved and in-progress redevelopment applications ranging in height from 18 to 42 stories across multi-towered sites, the proposed construction at 169 to 183 Victoria Street South establishes a precedent for an intermediate form of intensification. Overall, the proposal emphasizes balancing rapid urban growth with preserving neighborhood quality and heritage. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And now I would open it up to our committee members. Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. When you talk about compatible materials, what are you actually talking about?
So the predominant materials of the Heritage Conservation District are buff and red brick. So the cladding material proposed is a brick veneer that would complement the Heritage Conservation District while acting as sort of a intermediate with the more modern developments happening closer to the downtown core.
Okay, can you pull up this slideshow again, please, Mariah? I just wanted to look at slide number 2. Not that one. No. Oh, is there one in between? No, back. Back. That one. No, forward. You're showing the, are you from Kitchener?
Sorry?
Are you from here?
No.
No, okay, because where you've put your red markings is not where this building is being proposed. It should be between Henry and Park, not Teresa and Park.
Oh, okay. I apologize for that. Slight oversight. So that would be one block to the southwest.
Right,
So it's the, yes, correct.
okay, thank you. That, you might want to correct that. My other question has to do with the widening of Victoria Street. I understand the region is going to be widening the road. So what does that do to your landscaping that you're proposing on the Victoria Street side of the property?
The footprint of the proposed building has accounted for the road widening. It is the footprint is very limited because of that easement. So the proposal would be providing the landscaping, and then I expect that the future of that site is in the hands of the municipality and whether or not they retain all of the landscaping or whether they widen the road. There will still be landscaping around the immediate adjacency of the tower.
Okay, I guess my final question has to do with the setbacks, because I know this is of concern to the residents in that area. You know, it is a heritage district. It is one-story houses mostly in that area, certainly like small residential homes. And, you know, how can you put a block 8-story building in somebody's backyard, right? Like, do you see any problem with that?
I think that it works within the City of Kitchener Master Plan, which I saw some verbiage regarding the consideration of consolidation and up to 8-story growth along that corridor. It is not in the Heritage Conservation District. So therefore, we find that it is suitable considering the intense growth projections for City of Kitchener.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the delegation? Yes, Peter?
I wonder if you could confirm the use of the units on the ground floor. Are they all residential?
Let's take a look. I believe it's, could we have the, I believe that much of the ground floor is lobby, yes, and services in the rear. Because of the really restricted floor plate, I don't believe that there are any units on the ground floor.
So looking at the three-dimensional perspective, it appears that there are residential units that come down to the ground floor.
There are, well, they do not exit to to Victoria Street. I'm not the designer of this building, so I've been mainly focusing on the massing and how it relates to the HCD, so I do apologize for not having more clear answers. Okay, I suppose that there's the lobby and then there's a corridor, and that those units do not exit to Victoria Street based on this site plan, which doesn't show any access points along Victoria except for at the far end where the corridor exits.
Madam Chair, if I may contribute, I've had the benefit of having some discussions as part of the ongoing development applications, and I pulled up the floor plans that I do have in front of me. One of the fundamental principles that we want to ensure within our strategic growth areas, as well as along our priority streets, is that we have active uses at grade. The floor plans that I'm seeing, and they may have been newer since the delegate has seen them last, do have residential uses on the ground floor, 2-bedroom units in the corner, a lobby on the other corner, and then rightfully all of the utilities, mailroom, parcel, move-in, waste is all at the back of the building. So in terms of an execution of having active uses at grade, I can confirm that the proposal does show that. And all of the parking is below grade.
Good. That would have been my recommendation, is that the residential units that are on the ground floor have primary access from the street, as opposed to from the internal corridor of the building. So at street level, having people with a front door relationship to the street, I think would be a really effective way to tie this building to the residential neighborhood around it, so that the street is consistent with people living sort of and eyes on the street. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Are there any other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
I would now invite our members to present questions to staff on this item. Are there any comments? Thank you. Alona?
I'd like to comment on the lighting and fencing. I know this has been an issue for some of the builds that have happened in my community, where the lighting that has been put up has not been in character with the community itself, which has led to like really bright lights that are not in character at all with the community itself, not at all like the district heritage community. So I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, and also for fencing, to make sure that the fencing itself does not block off the view of any of the heritage district assets. Another comment that I have is that because this building is on the perimeter of the Victoria Park District, Heritage District, it's really important that the design elements of the building itself reflect some of the elements of the district itself. So even though it is not necessarily required as part of the plan, it still helps to ease the transition into the more modern if the elements from the community are reflected, not just the colors of the buildings, but also some of the design elements, like something a little bit softer than just a block. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Alona. Are there any other comments? So if I'm sort of bring this back, and what I've heard, concerns for staff and this initiative. I heard that we would prefer entrances at the street level for the bottom units. And also we have a concern about lighting and a concern about fencing. And I do think that is really a consideration with the lighting and fencing, but lighting in particular, because with the new, and we're seeing street lighting, I've seen it out in our Heritage District in Upper Doon, that it doesn't at all blend in with the older section of the area. And I'd just like to have you, Alona, if you could elaborate on lighting. I think you have made your point, but perhaps we need a little bit more clarification.
So some of the lights that I've seen that have come up have been just posts that have very bright LED lights on them that are white, as opposed to that yellowish color to them. So, and it's very much brighter than the community, the rest of the lights in the community. So that has been my concern. And it's very bright, it shines into windows, and it's disturbing for the neighborhood.
Thank you. And with regard to fencing, I know that there has been an issue over in your district, the busy Berlin area, fencing of new units. And what would you have preferred for fencing to what has actually been put in the ground?
Perhaps something that is more in character with the neighborhood itself. So maybe a metal fence as opposed to a solid wood fence, something that has a little bit more variation to it as opposed to one solid fence that you can't see through, so that you can see the homes that are behind those fences.
And in this day and age with materials that are available, I don't think that it's a far stretch to ask for some type of decorative fencing. I think now that you're in the start of your project, that it's one thing that should be looked at. And I would encourage staff to take these items that we have mentioned in consideration and make note of them. Councillor Chapman, you had mentioned about the 8-story, and I'm wondering, when I think of the zoning that we have come through and the plan, I recognize the fact that 8-story doesn't seem high compared to many of the buildings. However, when it's up against a 2-story, 3-story house, it is quite high. And I wondered if you had any further comments on that, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, no, I mean, it will come to council at some point, so I'm sure it will come up again. Thanks.
If I may ask staff, the height, the 8 stories, and I know, I can't think what the name of the zoning or the Kitchener growing together or whatever it was. And I know there was a lot of concern put forward by the residents of Victoria Park about 8-story buildings. And so is this in keeping now what was finally determined? Maybe Mr. Stevenson, Garrett, you could answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is within and you've got the name right, the Growing Together geography. So that's areas within our protected major transit station areas. So Heritage Kitchener will recall that that project manager came and attended and presented that project, and we had some good dialogue. There are provisions within that official plan policies that apply that talk about having a heritage conservation district that prevail. In this case, we are adjacent to the Heritage Conservation District, so certainly a consideration. But in looking at the Growing Together work, the SGA, the lowest land use designation allows for up to 8 stories in height. There are zones that restrict that further, and then the SGA 2 zone does allow for the 8 stories. That was really meant to, in order to preserve the housing stock and the built form character that exists within our heritage conservation districts, along nodes and corridors in areas that can accommodate growth, that additional height be permitted where it's appropriate. The zoning bylaw amendment that will be in front of council later next month, or later this month, there's some slight variations to the regulations that apply, but the 8 stories is a permitted height within this zone. So we expect that the strategic growth area zoning to be in place very shortly, and then the actual zoning bylaw amendment that would seek relief at council would be more straightforward and more aligned with the strategic growth area zoning.
Thank you for the explanation. Are there any other further questions for staff? Yes, Peter.
Not a question to staff, but just some more technical detail on the request for lighting. And you mentioned the color of the lighting, right, which is the color temperature. So it can be specified, and the higher the color temperature, the whiter, the bluer, the more daylight it is, and the lower is more into the yellow range. And historically, the yellow range is the look that we all associate with residential use. It's incandescent light range. So it's so specifically it would be approximately 2,800 to 3,200 K for the color temperature to keep it into that range. That's it, thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So there you have it, staff, all explained, and we do appreciate that, Peter.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
In regards to the lighting, there is a lighting standard that we would use, and it would be 3,000 K to get, it's actually metal halide is the light type that you're thinking of. And we would request that. We would also, through our urban design manual, impose our standard lighting guidelines on the site, which is full cutoff and dark sky compliant, so that there is not light trespassing into the adjacent properties. And all the light is directed down below the horizontal plane. So those would all be built into the discussions and the review of the lighting plans.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to our next item, which is heritage permit application for 153 Cortland Avenue East. I guess it's for demolition of a building. Michelle Drake, Senior Heritage Planner, will provide a presentation.
Through you, Chair, I'll just wait till the presentation is up on the screen. The city is in receipt of Heritage Permit Application 2024, Roman numeral 4, number 023, pertaining to the lands municipally addressed as 153 Cortland Avenue East. The applicant is seeking permission to demolish the single detached dwelling. The subject property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Designating bylaw 85-190 designates the subject property as being of historical and architectural value. The reasons for designating and physical values relating to the salt box architectural style with specific reference to the exterior of the building. Bylaw enforcement staff received a complaint expressing concerns about the exterior of the subject property in May of 2020. In response to this complaint, an inspection was undertaken and subsequently resulted in the issuance of an order to comply in June of 2020. The order to comply identified several deficiencies that required repair and/or replacement, including cladding, soffits and fascia boards, and windowsills. The deadline to complete this work lapsed on July 15th, 2020, with the owner failing to comply with the order. Bylaw enforcement staff have initiated the steps to bring the property into compliance. In November of 2023, permission to enter the building was granted by the owner, and it was determined that a structural analysis was required to be undertaken before proceeding with any exterior work. In March of 2024, bylaw enforcement received a copy of a structural condition assessment prepared by Tacoma Engineers dated April 4th, 2024. This assessment determined that the exterior work required to bring the property into compliance could not be completed without addressing structural issues, which would require that the entire building be rebuilt. With this information, bylaw enforcement staff proceeded to obtain quotes to bring the property into compliance. Now that they have these quotes, bylaw enforcement staff is proposing to demolish the single detached dwelling to comply with the order requiring that the buildings be either repaired or demolished. The structural condition assessment identified additional deficiencies and issues. The assessment concluded that the building is in poor condition. There is significant risk of portions of the building collapsing or becoming deteriorated beyond repair within the next 2 years, and that a comprehensive restoration strategy would be required for both the exterior and the interior of the building. The assessment identified interior issues, including peeling paint, high relative humidity, mold, roof and wall leaks, buckled hardwood floors, evidence of rodents, fair condition of rubble-stone foundation mortar, fair condition of timber floor joists, and potential compromised basement foundation. The assessment recommends that the following interior items be either repaired or reinforced or replaced, and that includes the roof itself, all interior finishes, deteriorated structural members, framing, and the basement foundation. The interior work would also require mold abatement. The assessment also identified exterior issues, including combination of bowing, missing, and deteriorated clapboard siding, deteriorated wall studs, deteriorated porch beams posing a life safety hazard, missing fascia, holes in the roof, and lack of eaves, troughs, and downspouts. The assessment recommends that the following exterior items would need to be repaired or reinforced or replaced, and in some cases added. And that pertains to the roof, the fascia, the front porch, the clapboard siding, the wall studs, the front wall, the rear wall, and the eaves troughs and downspouts. The life safety concerns with the French porch have been temporarily addressed with the installation of security fencing. With respect to the front and the rear wall, the assessment concludes that reframing of large sections of this wall, of these two walls, will be required. The applicant has obtained quotes to repair or demolish the building. With respect to the costs to repair, the first quote indicated that it would be a significant amount of money to bring the building to a minimum level of property standards and building code requirements, combined with a substantial cost to remove the contents that have been left in the building. The quote did not actually recommend repair, but because it was requested by city staff, they indicated that a first estimate would be $200,000, but likely much more. The second quote indicated that the entire single detached dwelling had structural damage, and that beyond the work to repair that damage, there would also be additional costs associated with removing the contents of the building, as well as the removal of 2 large trees in close proximity to the foundation and potentially causing the concern with the failing foundation. This estimate came in at between $450,000 to $500,000. The applicant also obtained quotes to demolish the building. The first quote, their recommendation was demolition as opposed to repair, and their quote came in at just over $43,000 or $43,500, with the second quote saying that it would be about almost $58,000. So in this instance, it means that the costs to repair and rehabilitate the building could be anywhere from about $150,000 to $450,000 more than the costs associated with demolition of the building. In terms of the merits of the application, the property standards order to comply has been issued against the property, requiring the owner to repair or demolish the dwelling. The deadline to bring that property into compliance has lapsed, and the owner failed to comply. A structural condition assessment concluded that the exterior work required to bring the property into compliance could not be completed without addressing structural issues, which would require the single detached dwelling to be rebuilt. The assessment concluded that there is significant risk of portions of the building collapsing or becoming deteriorated beyond repair within the next 2 years. The deteriorated porch beams pose a life safety hazard. The security fencing that has been installed around the porch is a temporary measure to protect the public from this life safety hazard. The heritage attributes of the single detached dwelling are in a state of advanced deterioration. Since the owner has not brought the property into compliance, bylaw enforcement staff are required to bring the property into compliance. Bylaw enforcement staff have obtained 2 quotes outlining the costs to repair and the cost to demolish. In accordance with section 15.1 to 15.8 of the Building Code Act, bylaw enforcement staff are required to proceed with the lowest quote to bring a property into compliance. And the work to repair the single detached dwelling could range from $150,000 to about $450,000 more than the quotes provided for the demolition of the building. So as a result, staff are recommending that pursuant to Section 34 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024, my apologies, that should be Roman numeral number 4, application number 023, be approved to permit the demolition of the single detached dwelling at the property municipally addressed as 153 Cortland Avenue East, and further that pursuant to Section 31 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to repeal bylaw 85-190, registered on December 3rd, 1985, being a bylaw to designate the property municipally addressed as 153 Cortland Avenue East. That concludes my presentation. I am available for questions, and Mr. Ventos from Manager in Enforcement is also here to respond to questions.
Thank you, Michelle. I am rather shocked by the progress and lack of progress on this particular property, having driven past it many times. Also having seen it designated in 1985. So before I add any more comments, I'd just like to open to committee members if you have questions for staff or comments. Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, it's to bylaw. How did this happen? And is this something that would be prevented in the future, or do we have many examples of how this has happened, whether houses that are designated or not? Yeah, because it does seem quite extreme.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, it can happen because unfortunately the legislation that we're governed under does not allow us to complete interior inspections or complete work with inside of a property. So this is what happened in this situation. So we were prepared to go and complete the work on the exterior of the property as per the order. And the officer, when he was on site obtaining quotes for those repairs, saw some structural concerns, which then in turn spearheaded an inspection with a building inspector. The property owner's representative at the time did grant us access into the property. And after that inspection, it was recommended that we get a structural engineer report for the property due to some concerns that the building inspector saw. So typically we would have gone ahead and completed the repairs on the exterior, but we do not have the authority to complete any of the repairs on the interior of a property unless we are invited in to do so. So this could happen again, unfortunately.
And if repairs were to be done, which I know that's not what's being recommended here, is that who pays for that? Like the taxpayers, or is it the homeowner?
Through you, Madam Chair, it would, if the property owner fails to pay the invoice, it would be added to taxes.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. And are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Elona.
So this neglect obviously took many years for it to happen. Were there any prior complaints, or was there any other prior order to comply that was issued for this property?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we have had, I believe, 2 previous orders for exterior work to the property. But again, that's only dealing with the exterior, not the interior.
So did they comply at that time, or?
I believe 2 of the orders were complied with, yes.
Okay. I find this really distressing because this building was built in 1866. And for at least 100 years, it stood and, you know, it was fine. And it was just over the recent years of neglect that this has happened. So this is it's really distressing.
Through you, Madam Chair, if we were to do the repairs on the outside, again, there isn't anything that we would be able to do to prevent the deterioration from the inside, which from the report that we got from the engineer, within 2 years, there would be very concerning structural concerns.
Madam Chair, just to add to that comment, obviously this condition and the fact that the building got to this condition is not ideal. So I can tell you that our heritage planning team and our bylaw enforcement team have recently worked together and have looked and taken inventory of vacant buildings, specifically vacant buildings that are within heritage conservation districts or are individually designated. And we are being more proactive in our review of that. So it's an area of work that we're going to continue to focus on, but your point is heard loud and clear.
Thank you, Elona and Garrett, for that information update. Are there any other comments? Thank you, Natalie.
Yes, I just had a question regarding should the property be demolished, what are the future plans for that property? Will it be vacant or will there be something put in its place?
Through you, Chair, at this point in time, it would remain vacant until the owner chose to proceed with, either a rebuild or selling and someone else proposing something on the lot.
Thank you, Natalie. Further to that question, what is the zoning on that particular property? So, a single family, it could be a duplex, triplex, 4 stories in the air. What can go on the property once it is demolished?
Through you, Chair, I believe Mr. Stevenson's just pulling up the zoning for us.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting our software to load so I can look at that quickly, but there is no zone in the city of Kitchener where a single detached dwelling would be permitted. 4 units as of right is permitted citywide as a result of recent changes in the implementation of both some federal and some provincial direction on addressing the housing crisis. So I will look it up for you and maybe I can follow up with an email and advise. It may be subject to growing together. I'm just going to double check that.
So could it be greater than 4 units?
I will give you an answer in a few minutes.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? I remember this property very well as a member of the Heritage Committee known as LACAC, Local Architectural Conservation Advisory Committee, in 1985. I do recall the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Reed, who are very proud of this particular property. I do know the former owners, the Rydals, and it was, oh my, it was just a spectacular little property of the past. It was just cherished so much. I have concerns because I've been watching this property for a long time. As I drive by it, as I went door to door, talking to people, I was informed that the property owner really wanted to naturalize the front yard. And I would say that it's more than 10 years of having this front yard overgrown. And I would really have to say, I know we've been concentrating on the interior and talking about that from property standards. However, I can't help but wonder how the exterior was compromised, how the wooden structure was compromised by this particular overgrown state. And I do not understand why, when other people will have notification from the city that their grass is too long, why this property was allowed to go on with this particular vegetation. And is there really nothing that, and I understand too, because in the past we've tried to get away from growing grass. We want to naturalize. But there comes a point in time when naturalization is harmful, in my opinion. So I don't know, do property standards have any comment about growth in the front yard that could compromise a wooden structure such as this?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, when it comes to compromising a building, unless it's an immediate safety concern, then we would be able to act on it, but not typically when there's vegetation on a property, we deal with it if it's in a driveway visibility or corner visibility triangle. But other than that, when people decide to plant trees and shrubs and so on and so forth on a property, there's really not much that we can do to address those issues.
Thank you. I will say that having driven past it, and for this many years, I did register my concern with staff formerly, and I wondered, and I will say it's pre-2020, and I just wonder what happened. I guess one must have to have a written statement to deal with it and have it acknowledged. It's very grievous for me to see how a property that was so loved and so well taken care of, and the gem on the street could have gotten to this particular state. Are there any other questions or comments? I have another for staff. I realize that under the Ontario Heritage Act, our job is to designate properties, and each year we do send out notifications indicating that now's the time to apply for grants if you want to do work on your property. However, I wonder if there's any way that staff can be in touch with owners to do a kind reminder or a kind task. Once property standards becomes involved, then it's pretty high-powered, in my opinion. And I think by having some negotiating or talking, sometimes we can move the needle back into good form. So I wonder, is there any place where staff could do a gentle reminder or investigate, especially in a building like this? Probably one of a kind, and now it's gone. I take it back. There is another frame building out in the Homer Watson House, the birthplace. It has frame, but this one is all frame. Michelle, are you willing to tell me something?
Through you, Chair, we do have a process in place now whereby our team works with our bylaw team when they are out on sites that have a heritage interest. So that being either a individually designated property under Part 4 or a property within a district designated under Part 5. The order itself even identifies that the owners should connect with heritage staff. And with respect to the new protocol of proactively inspecting our vacant heritage buildings, we are in touch with owners and will in the future be in touch with those owners to remind them or let them know if they don't already know about the various programs that are in place from a funding perspective. So those steps are in place. It is unfortunate where this particular property got to, but as Mr. Ventros mentioned, there were previous orders. They did address items on the exterior, but we didn't know the concerns on the interior. And moving forward, our approach will create more work, but it's good work in trying to be proactive in inspecting our heritage properties, following up with property standards where required, promoting the heritage grant funding as perhaps a mechanism to help owners bring their properties into compliance, as opposed to the situation that is before us today, where the cost to repair is quite significant.
Further, thank you, Michelle. So if we look at costs and estimates, the demolition seems really reasonable. However, environmentally, we're dragging off a lot of material to the waste management area of the region, filling up the landfill, and carbon emissions for taking the the material to the landfill. That should be considered, but it looks a lot cheaper. However, if I were to rebuild something on that property, I might, in this day and age, be lucky to get away with $400,000. And there are ways to do restoration on it or rebuild it. So those are my observations. However, are there any, yes, Councillor Chap.
Yeah, are you connected to this property? Oh, no. Okay, I thought somebody said that there's a representative here for the property. No? Did I get that wrong? Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Madam Chair, I can confirm the zoning of the property is residential 5. That was amended through our Growing Together work to SGA Strategic Growth Area Zone 1. Because the lot width of this property is less than 12 meters, a multiple dwelling would not be permitted. The maximum amount of units here would be 4 units would be permitted. So that would be a single detached dwelling with 3 attached dwelling units, or 1 attached dwelling unit, so a duplex, and then potentially a tiny house with 2 units in the rear yard. So the maximum amount of units here would be 4.
Thank you, Garrett. I will now turn to the resolution. So I will read the motion, and then I will ask for someone to move it. That pursuant to Section 34 of Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024, should that be V, 023, be approved to permit the demolition of the single detached dwelling at the property municipally addressed as 153 Cortlandt Avenue East. And further, that pursuant to Section 31 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to repeal bylaw 85-190 registered on December 3rd, 1985 as instrument number 833418, being a bylaw to designate the property municipally addressed as 153 Cortlandt Avenue East. Is there a mover for this? Donnie moved. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? This report will go to council on October 21st, 2024. Our next item is Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024 IV-018, 1385 Bleems Road, construction of a 3-story stacked townhouse complex with 8 units. Diksha, will you please present the presentation of the proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we've seen this property a number of times this year. Hopefully this is one of the last times. So we do have a heritage permit application for 1385 Bleems Road. It's located on the south side of Bleems Road and is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The application is for the construction of a new 8-unit stacked townhome complex on the western edge of the property. The committee will recall that the initial proposal was presented to the committee in March of 2023, with a revised proposal being presented to the committee last month at its September 2024 meeting. So this was the initial proposal for 8 three-stack townhomes towards the rear of the building, towards the rear of the property, and took up almost all of the western portion of the property. This was the first proposal that was presented to the committee in March of 2023. A heritage permit application was submitted this year with a revised proposal, which you can see before you. Staff had some concerns regarding the design, being the concentration of the development around the designated heritage resources. You will notice that the heritage permit application includes wording that speaks about development on the eastern edge of the property. This was the proposal that was initially submitted with this application. Staff worked with the applicants to address some of these concerns, and they were very accommodating with the comments that were provided, which has resulted in the revision of the proposal and the final proposal that you see before you today. So this development was changed to the final proposal that is being considered by the committee today. This proposal includes development along the western edge of the property with parking towards the rear of the property. The proposed development will be clad in stucco and brick veneer with a hip roof and also includes porches with similar fenestration designs in the front and the back, as well as the side. In reviewing merits of this application, Heritage Planning staff note that the proposed development will be at least 30 meters away from the existing protected heritage resources on the property. There are no changes proposed to the existing heritage resources, and they will be preserved in situ. The proposed development is distinguishable from the existing heritage resources, yet complementary. It does not dominate or overshadow the existing heritage resources, but can be easily identified as a building of its own time. In addition to the draft HIA that was submitted and presented to the committee last month, an updated conservation plan and a vibration monitoring report has also been submitted to ensure the long-term protection of the existing heritage resources. The proposed development will not detract from the cultural heritage value of the existing heritage resources, nor its reasons for designation. Thus, staff are recommending that this heritage permit application be approved pending the approval of the HIA, the conservation plan, the vibration monitoring report, and elevations by the required designate. I am here to answer any questions that the committee might have, but we also have somebody from the applicant's team who may be able to answer questions that the committee might have. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deeksha. And listed on our delegation list is Owen Scott. I don't see him here. Do we have someone else from that?
Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Scott was not able to attend the meeting today, but we do have someone from the team who can answer questions.
Would the person come forward, please? If you'd introduce yourself. that
I'm
would
John,
help.
I'm the property owner.
Thank you very much. So, committee members, do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Well, maybe this should be to staff, but so will you be severing the property, or it's going to be part of the same property?
There is no plans.
There's no
And we don't have any plans yet. So
no plans to sever. So what does that do? Does that mean the whole, like, is it the property that will then be designated, or just the current building?
I don't think the stacks will be part of the heritage.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't make sense that they would be. So what, is there no requirement to sever the property in order to have one designated and the other not?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are no plans at this time to sever the property, and the designation is registered on the title of the property. So technically, the new bills would have that designation, but if there's any alterations for the new property, unless there's a severance or an amendment of the bylaw, they would have to contact staff, in which case we would not require a heritage permit application or any sort of documentation for the new development. But technically, the designation would be on the title of the new townhome complex.
So what's in place to ensure that somehow what's being proposed here is meets some heritage requirements? Like, how does that work?
So through you, Madam Chair, that is being done through this heritage permit application. So when they initially submitted a heritage permit application, we did have some concerns, and we have worked with them to address those concerns. Prior to the final approval of this heritage permit, the HIA will need to be approved, the conservation plan and the elevation drawings will need to be approved, which will ensure that whatever is being built on the property is being done and in a compatible way to the existing heritage resources, and that those are protected in the long term. Unless the applicant applies for a severance or an amendment to the designating bylaw, it's not within staff's purview to require that. That has to be initiated from the owner.
Okay, thank you.
There is no plans on selling or anything to purpose-built rentals, or we're gonna live in the house and we keep the rentals. So there is no plans on.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to commend you for working with staff with our delegation here. And I do believe that the proposal that is now presented to us is much more positive for the heritage structure that remains on it. So thank you for working with staff. And thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions for the delegation? Okay. Now, thank you, I'll let you have a seat. Are there questions for staff? Seeing none, I will then read the motion. And this one will go to council for approval on October 21st. Resolved that pursuant to Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024 IV-018 be approved to permit the construction of a 3-story stacked townhome complex with 8 units at the property municipally addressed as 1385 Bleams Road in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with this application and subject to the following conditions. A heritage impact assessment addendum be approved by the Director of Development and Housing Approvals prior to the issuance of the heritage permit. B, that the updated conservation plan, including the vibration monitoring report, be approved by the Director of Development and Housing Approvals prior to the issuance of the heritage permit. C, that the building elevations be submitted for review to the satisfaction of the city's heritage planner prior to the issuance of the heritage permit. And D, that the final building permit be reviewed, heritage clearance be provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of the building permit. Who will move it? Councillor Natalie will. Thank you. All those in favor? Carried. So it goes to the council October 21. 4.4 Heritage Permit Application for 466 Queen Street South, installation of 1 new window opening and 2 wood windows. And this property is the Schneider House, correct? All right, Michelle Drake will provide a brief presentation.
Through you, Chair. As you mentioned, this is Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024, Roman numeral 5, application number 20, for the property municipally addressed as 466 Queen Street South, but most of us probably know it as the Joseph Schneider House. This permit is seeking permission to install a new window opening and new windows on the 1987 gallery addition located to the rear of the original Joseph Schneider House. The property is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act because it is located in the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District. A excerpt from the study, not the district plan, but the study indicates that Kitchener's most historic building, the circa 1816 building, is described as a two-story Mennonite Georgian-style frame-side gabled farmhouse with full-width veranda and later rear additions to accommodate its museum functions. Enclosed by a picket fence, it is an outstanding example of conservation. The property, as I mentioned, is in the district. It was the and still is the Joseph Schneider House. It was constructed in the Mennonite Georgian architectural style. It has been identified by council as a property of very high cultural heritage value or interest, or we often use the language Group A building. And the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District Plan indicates that major work requires a heritage permit application. And an example of major work is creating a new opening where one did not previously exist. So the proposal, as mentioned previously, is to install one new window opening and windows on the 1987 gallery addition. This aerial sort of site plan and aerial photo show the long length of the building that I don't think I appreciated before looking at this application. But the rectangle closer to the north or the northeast in red is the building elevation wall where the new opening will be put. And that particular section of the building was built in 1987. This is a drawing provided by the applicant. They did advise that someone would be here to respond to questions today, but I'm not seeing any. So if there are questions, I can try my best to respond to them. So the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District Plan outlines the building conservation guidelines for windows, and they note that the position, shape, and design of windows establish the historic style and character of a building, and that the Georgian style window is the earliest style and usually consists of the 6/6 sash design with a wood frame. The proposed new window opening will be 4 feet high by 6 feet wide and located about 2 feet above the finished floor level. The proposed new windows will be paired with each individual window being about 4 feet by 3 feet, and the new windows are proposed to match the windows that are already existing in the 1987 gallery addition. The federal standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada and the province's 8 guiding principles in the conservation of built heritage resources address conservation principles and standards related to the design of additions and alterations, requiring that they be distinguishable, identifiable from the cultural heritage resource and its heritage attributes. These documents did not exist when the 1987 gallery addition was built. However, they did give thought at the time to developing a physically and visually compatible addition in terms of location, mass, architecture, material, and design. Further, in the past, the mission or vision expressed by the Joseph Schneider House focused on restoring, rehabilitating, and interpreting the property to the year 1856. As a result of the aforementioned information, it is the opinion that of Heritage Planning staff that the new window opening and the two new the two new wood windows do not need to be distinguishable from the old, in quotes, because in this case, the old refers to the non-original 1987 edition, where the proposed new window opening and the proposed new windows will match what was constructed in 1987. In terms of the merits of the application, the subject property is located in the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District. For several decades, the mission and vision for the Joseph Schneider House site was to restore, rehabilitate, interpret the year 1856. The 1987 gallery addition was built prior to the passing of the designating bylaw for the district. And it was at the time guided by that mission, that 1856 mission and vision. The federal standards and guidelines and the province's guiding principles did not exist in 1987, and the proposal will match the existing windows of that 1987 gallery addition. In more recent years, the Joseph Schneider House has taken on a much broader vision, where they are not pinpointing their interpretation and rehabilitation works to one specific year, but rather a more inclusive story of the site. The proposal is in keeping with the Victoria Park plan in terms of the building conservation guidelines, and it will not detract from the character of the property itself, the Queen Street streetscape, or the Victoria Park district. And as a result, staff are recommending that pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024, Roman numeral 5, Application 20, be approved to permit the installation of one new window opening and associated wood windows on the 1987 gallery addition to the rear of the Joseph Schneider House on the property municipally addressed as 466 Queen Street South, in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with the application and subject to the following condition: that the final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance issued by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any questions about this application? Yes, Ilona.
Just one question. I noticed that on the original house, there were shutters on the front. Will there also be shutters on this window? I didn't see what the newer windows looked like.
Through you, Chair, no, the later additions do not have shutters adjacent to their windows.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I shall read the motion. That pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024 V-020 be approved to permit the installation of one new window opening and two new wood windows on the 1987 gallery addition to the rear of the Joseph Schneider House on the property municipally addressed as 466 Queen Street South, in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with the application, subject to the following condition: that the final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. So who will move that? Councillor Michaud. All those in favor? Carried. And this one would probably go to council.
Through you, Chair, this could be approved under delegated approval as I believe it was a unanimous vote, and the condition is a standard condition.
Right, thank you. All right, 4.5, notice of intention to designate 107 Cortlandt Avenue East. Is that, right. And Michelle Drake, would you do the presentation?
Through you, Chair. So the report before the committee today is DSD 2024-426 with a notice of intention to designate. A full assessment of 107 Cortlandt Avenue East has been completed. The findings concluded that the subject property meets 5 of the 9 criteria for designation under Ontario Heritage Act Regulation 906 as amended. The property is recognized for its design physical value, its historic associative value, and its contextual value. An updated statement of significance describing the property's cultural heritage value or interest was presented to Heritage Kitchener on August 6th, 2024. The committee recommended that pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the cultural heritage value or interest of 107 Cortlandt Avenue East should be confirmed by pursuing designation of the subject property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The property demonstrates design physical value as a rare example of a two-story 20th century brick school built as a vernacular example of the Beaux Arts classicism architectural style. In Ontario, this style was present between 1900 and 1945 and primarily used for public and semi-public buildings such as post office, banks, and libraries. Ontario architects generally preferred this classical interpretation of the Roman or Greek architecture, but on a much smaller scale. This preference can be seen in the scale, symmetry, and simplicity of the Cortlandt Avenue Public School building design, primarily the front facade. The design also pays tribute to the semicircular arches of the main entrance, the bell tower, and the second floor windows of an earlier school that once stood on this site. And those attributes are referenced through the blind semicircular stone arches that are located on the front facade at each end of the building. The historic associative value relates to the associations with public education, and it demonstrates the work of an architect and builder who were significant to Berlin, now Kitchener. The property was the third site for a public school in Berlin. The original building was constructed in 1890 as a 4-room school at a cost of $5,500. In 1903, 4 new classrooms were added to the school at a cost of $3,000. The current building was designed by Bernal A. Jones and constructed by the Dunker Brothers in 1928 at a cost of just around $94,000. B.A. Jones moved to Kitchener in 1922 and worked with W.H.E. Schmaltz until opening his own office in 1926. During that time, B.A. Jones assisted W.H.E. Schmaltz design the Granite Club, the former City Hall, the 1922-23 Kitchener City Hall. B.A. Jones was also responsible for the design of several other important buildings in Kitchener, such as the 1927 KW Granite Club, the 1932 PUC building, and the 1936-37 Church of the Good Shepherd. The Dunker Brothers were a well-known and respected local building company that operated from 1887 through to 1974. They were responsible for the construction of several other important buildings in Kitchener, such as, again, the Granite Club and the 1938-39 Regency Theatre. The contextual value relates to the property being physically, functionally, and historically linked to its surroundings. It is physically and historically linked to its original site and continues to function as a public school. As a result, staff are recommending that pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, that the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intent to designate the property municipally addressed as 107 Cortlandt Avenue East as being of cultural heritage value or interest. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any questions for Michelle? However, I'm looking to see if we have any delegations on this. Seeing none, then to staff for Michelle. Any questions about this designation? Any comments? If not, then, I'm sorry, Councillor Chapman, you have one? No. All right. I will read the motion, and if it receives approval from us, committee, it will go to council for approval October 21, 2024. So it's resolved, or the motion is, pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the clerk be directed to publish a notice of intention to designate the property municipally addressed as 107 Cortlandt Avenue East as being of cultural heritage value or interest. Who will move it? Andrew will, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Unanimously. Goes to council, October 21. Our next item, 4.6, 83 Benton Street, is a notice of intention to designate, and at the request of staff, this item has been removed from the agenda for the 2024 October 1st meeting of our meeting to allow staff the opportunity for further discussion with the property owners. This item will be rescheduled for a later meeting date. No motion is required, but I just wonder if there are any questions for staff on this. Seeing none, we will then go on to Bill 23, Municipal Heritage Register Review for October 2024, the update. Deeksha, would you like to present? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have two properties that have been reviewed as part of this month's MHR review. This property was assessed by Ms. Jessica Vieira, who isn't here today, so I'll be presenting on her behalf. So the first property is 80 to 86 Union Boulevard, 571 York Street. The property contains two mid-20th century apartment buildings located at the corner of Union Boulevard and York Street. You can see one of them here. The other one, unfortunately, is covered by the big tree, but they're identical in design. These buildings meet 5 out of 9 criteria as outlined in OREG 906 and have been identified for their design, physical, associative, and contextual value. Built in 1944, these apartment buildings have design value because they are a unique example of Art Modern architectural style with Art Deco influences. The Art Modern architectural style emerged during the 1930s and developed out of the Art Deco architectural style. It is characterized by its use of simple geometric shapes, long horizontal lines, and banding, curved side and corner windows, glass block windows, as seen in 80 to 86 Union Boulevard. 571 York Street. The Art Deco influences can be seen in the decorative detailing that adorn the building, such as the leaf motifs above the entrance and the carved Union apartment symbol, or the more dramatic and ornate front entrance around. The property also has design value because it displays a high degree of craftsmanship or artistic merit due to its Art Deco influences. The Art Modern style of architecture and the carved Union apartment symbols provide a greater degree of artistic merit. The building has associative value because it has the potential to yield information that contributes to the understanding of development patterns in the late 1930s to 1960s, specifically the construction boom of apartments in the city as an efficient and economical means to create a sufficient supply of housing as the population increased in the city. These apartment buildings were one of the first of several constructed in the Art Modern style. The building has contextual value because it is important in maintaining and supporting the character of the area. These apartment buildings contribute to the continuity and character of Union Boulevard and the York Street streetscape. These apartment buildings are also located within the Westmount Cultural Heritage landscape. The overall design, setback, form, and materials are complementary to the adjacent property. The building also has contextual value because it is functionally, physically, historically, and visually linked to its surroundings. The buildings remain in their original location and maintain its original residential use. The next property on the MHR review is 160 Margaret Avenue. The subject property is located on the east side of Margaret Avenue and also known as the New Apostolic Church. The church meets 5 out of 9 criteria and has been recognized for its design, physical, historical, and contextual value. Sorry, I'll just jump back to this. The building has design value because it is a representative example of the Gothic architectural style. Built in 1974, it is in excellent condition and retained most of its original elements. The church features an irregular plan, limestone cladding, cross gable roof encompassing tower on the south side, a projecting main entrance, surrounding arched arcade, and Gothic windows. At the time of its construction, the church was made to seat 1,200 people, making it one of the largest churches in the region of Waterloo. The church has historical and associative value because it has direct associations with the new apostolic church. The church started in England around 1832, and early services of the new apostolic church were held in Waterloo in 1925 by the parent church in the United States. And by 1930, services were also being held at 20 Ellen Street in Kitchener. By 1958, a sufficient number of congregations had been formed to organize a separate Canadian district church and ordained Michael Krause as district apostle of church in Zurich on June 21st, 1958. The church has associative value because of its associations with Michael Krause, who was a reverend of the church and also a prominent businessman in the region. Upon being ordained into the ministry, he traveled extensively and sent fellow missionaries all over the world and helped establish the new apostolic church in over 70 countries. The church membership had grown to 4 million by his retirement in 1994. The associative values also relate to the architect of the building. The building was designed by Albert Karl Reiter of Reiter and Hyman. His career spanned 47 years, and he was involved in the design of over 400 buildings, including designs for universities, public buildings, other churches, industrial facilities, and more than 100 private residences. The building has contextual value because it is important in maintaining and supporting the character and streetscape of Margaret Avenue, and it also has contextual value because it is historically and functionally linked to its surroundings. It remains in its original location and has been used as a church since its construction. Thus, staff recommend that designation be pursued for both properties that have been reviewed as part of this month's amateur review. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. Are there questions with respect to either of these properties? Comments? It's rather refreshing to see that we're finding properties for designation in other areas of the city, and I don't think we've had any, have we, in Westmount or that area. But it's a rather nice group to have designated if they go forward. So, thank you. All right, I will read the motion. Pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the cultural heritage value or interest be recognized and designation be pursued for the following properties: 80-86 Union Boulevard, 571 York Street, and property at 160 Margaret Avenue. Are there any questions to staff on this? Who would move it? Thank you, Ilona. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And now, information items. We have the heritage permit application tracking sheet. Are there any questions for staff on that? Seeing none, we can adjourn the meeting. Who would be willing to adjourn the meeting? Andrew would. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting. See you in November.